John Robinson, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, David. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. And my goodness, we're going to be talking about your latest book. You've written, this is your 12th book, which is pretty great. Let me just show it for people who are watching us on camera. It looks like this. It's not burdensomely thick. So it's just about the right size, the right number of pages, I would say. 200 pages, and the 200 includes some good resources that people will be interested in. And what a great title, More Love, Less Conflict. I mean, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't need it, and who doesn't want it? That's really a good selling thing. And while I'm pumping you up here, I want to let people know about the wonderful YouTube rap that you did about the book. So listeners, viewers, if you go to YouTube and just type in More Love, Less Conflict, I think you'll find it. So, and it's fun. It's fun.
They may not know what you're talking about. To advertise the book, I made a rap video about it. Okay, and then I made a video that includes my dogs selling the book. So anything that works, because I want to get the message out there.
Yeah, I thought that the dog one was delightful too. I'll put the link somewhere in the show for people. If they go to the website, you'll find a link to it. And, you know, I think people, when somebody comes on with a self-help book and so on, with a lot of advice and so on, sometimes people come to it with a little bit of skepticism. They want to know, does the expert really have they walked the walk? Do they have real experience with it? So, are you married?
Yeah, I've been married 22 years.
Okay, I think you qualify.
Yay, yay.
Yay, this pretty qualified expert here. And you also have extensive training, I gather, in family systems therapy, among other approaches.
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. But, you know, luckily, none of this came easily to me. I was a very shy, depressed kid, which originally is what got me into this. And so I had to learn it all. And that's kind of why I can teach it better, because I had to actually get every step. And I saw that a lot of these books had too much theory and it didn't really work in real life. So I tried to come up with and steal the best methods that could be mastered in under a minute. And that's how the book came about.
Yeah, that's very ambitious. I believe what you're saying, that when you have to work to learn something yourself, that can really make you a good teacher, because you can break it down. And I always felt that was important in my teaching as well. It seems like well, let's see, like there are lots of books over I would say the past 50 years on communication, and lots of books that tell people, you know, here are some ways you can you can improve your communication, like active listening was a big one, you know, so repeat back more or less the intent of what your partner just said to you, and so on. And yet, with all of those books on communication, the divorce rate is around 45% still.
Yeah.
So why is that? So somebody said that about psychotherapy at some point. They were raising questions, you know, saying we've had 100 years of psychotherapy and still the world's a pretty messed up place. You know, how do we defend ourselves against that claim? Well, there's been a lot of research on psychotherapy actually to show that it is effective. But what's your take on, you know, why another book on communications, I guess?
Well, I think we underestimate, first of all, how much stress there is in the world. So that can lead to problems. But when under stress, we kind of go into our reptile brain and we don't remember all this, you know, theory and complicated techniques. So a lot of my methods take under 5 seconds to do. That we can remember. Like
Maybe.
they usually involve like fill in the blank to this sentence or say these two words. So what I found is that a lot of these communication method books that I read didn't work for me.
Hmm.
So then I came upon, well, what actually does work for me and my wife and the other people that I did therapy with. And so I went through about 400 techniques, and I found that 360 of them were complete garbage, meaning nobody I knew actually could use them.
Wow.
So
Wow.
then I came up with the 40 that people could use, and I write about those in the book. Um, so that's why I think, although there's a lot of books out there, they're not simple enough that most people can use them when they're really stressed out or when they really need them. And and people don't necessarily learn just by repetition. You know, the divorce rate for second marriages is higher, and for third marriages it's higher. So, you know, we have this approach, which is the blame, complain, and shame method of dealing with relationships, and that clearly doesn't work. So what we need is a more advanced technology, really simple methods that work even when you are totally stressed out.
Well, that makes sense to me. That that's a good answer, a good reply. And did you and your wife have to work at communication? I mean, did you? What's her background? Is she a psychotherapist, for example?
She is a psychotherapist. You put two psychotherapists together, you're usually in trouble.
Yeah,
So,
it's not necessarily a helpful thing. That's true.
but you know, we were committed to trying a bunch of stuff to see what actually worked in real life. And so a lot of it is, oh, this worked, this didn't, this worked, this didn't. You know, we used to argue a lot. And then in the last 5 years, we've had no arguments.
Wow.
And it's based on a method that just involves saying two words. So that's a pretty good
Uh-oh.
method.
I'm sorry. I just remembered I forgot to put this phone somewhere else.
Okay.
Well, it only rang once. I don't think it'll ring much. We'll just let go.
Okay. So what we do is if we're getting a little bit stressed or hot under the collar, either of us can say the words red light. And what
Uh-huh.
that means is that we need to take a 2-minute break from talking and just sit there holding hands and calm down. And when you don't have that momentum of escalating things, you usually can get back to your rational mind. And for the last 5 years, we haven't had an argument because we have that very simple technique. And
Wow, that is so impressive. Yeah.
those are the types of things I like to mention in the book because they're immediately useful, not just in romantic relationships, but really any relationship.
Okay, I'm going to focus for a while on romantic relationships, and then talk. You'll know when I shift gears
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the world at large, and our communication in other spheres. Um, before I heard your answer, I was wondering, well, is there a chance that poor communication is a symptom and not a cause? And I was wondering, well, is there research that supports the idea that improving communication can actually save marriages?
There is research that says that, and there's also research that shows that there's a high correlation between your communication skill and how happy your marriage is, and your communication skill and how much money you make. Because it's really a lot of what we do in life is communicate. You
Yeah.
know, the first time I was on the Oprah show, I knew a little bit about Oprah's background.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations, by the way. That's a major win.
Yeah. So the
You got to
first
be a
time I
good
was on,
communicator to get onto the Oprah show. Go ahead. I'll let you talk.
so I asked her, you know, I knew her background, which was, you know, she never lived in a house that even had running water, much less a toilet. She was raped twice by the time she was 14. She had a stillborn child. She was put in the retarded people's class at school.
Mm.
So I knew, you know, she had this horrible background. I asked her, how did you become what is currently the most loved person on the planet? And she said, it's all about showing you care and your communication skills. And I believe that some people, whether it be her or Obama or somebody else, who can rise to the top of their field because they have a way of communicating that's different than how most people do that. And, Obama ended up not just president, but also has a great marriage. So I started to see that really everybody wants the same thing. They want understanding and empathy. And
Okay.
if you can give that, you get back a lot of good things.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You got me believing what you're saying here, and I'm recognizing that I need to do some work too. We'll see if I can get my wife to read this book. That's always a little bit of a challenge. Um,
Well, let me just comment on that. A lot of people say, well, I'm committed to this, but my partner isn't. So if you're trying to learn the tango, it does take two to tango.
right, right.
But it doesn't actually take two good communicators to have good communication in a relationship. It really only takes one, because they can then direct the communication. So I've seen a lot of, women, for example, who come in, their husband is not going to come into a therapist, but by using some of these methods, they're able to actually change how the communication happens in their relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can believe that. I think that maybe if the couple were to read the book together, maybe that could also be a way to get some agreement about it.
Sure, that helps. I personally don't read.
No, you're
But
writing books. You're writing books and doing interviews.
I always listen to my book, so luckily it's on Audible.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of Audible books myself. Well, what do you mean when you say you don't read? I mean,
Well, everybody's so busy nowadays that it's hard to get time to read. That's why, Audible is really nice, so you can listen to books.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
While
I
you're
think,
doing something else, being
yeah,
busy,
yeah, driving usually.
driving for me, or being in the doctor's office.
hmm So I think also a lot of books aren't that entertaining. They're just too much information. And so I try to make my books entertaining as well.
Yeah, yeah. That's wonderful. Certainly that came through in the 2 YouTubes that you put up to help advertise the book. And what about, sometimes people think that, say, well, we'll, there was the idea that it's good to stay together for the children. And then there's been a sort of a backlash to that idea, saying, well, it's not necessarily good for the children. You're just modeling a lot of unhappiness. Um, Do you think there are situations where divorce is the right outcome?
Sure. And studies show that it's more important that the parents be happy than they be together in terms of having their effect on children. So if you have two parents who are fighting and they're not able to work things out, even though they're together, that's not a good effect on the children. But more important than staying together or not staying together is really what is the quality of the communication between those two people. If you have two parents that speak well about each other and are supportive, even if they're not together, that's going to have a good effect. So I think the best investment people can have in their kids' happiness is learning how to model good, loving communication with anyone. And that's a gift that is not just for yourself, but it's for your kids, it's for your coworkers and everything like that. The good news is most people, if you ask them to do a lecture on communication skills, that lecture would last about 3 minutes, meaning we don't know a lot.
Okay.
I say it's good news because if you even get 20 minutes of useful information, that puts you way ahead of the game of everybody. And now you're the expert and you can model that for everybody around you. And it's really a different way of talking.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you about what people or psychotherapies might have influenced your approach most. It sounds like you're saying you pretty much invented your approach yourself, but you also went to a graduate program and all. What stuck for you, or what really helped?
What stuck wasn't so much theories, it was certain people that
Yeah.
I connected with, and I said, wow, I'd like to be like them. So I
Uh-huh.
did have one advisor who was a really good communicator. And, it didn't really matter what his approach was. I said, I want to be somebody who communicates in a way that people really get, that his love comes through. And so I think really what people want is people who are authentic, who are real, and that the theory or the approach is of much less importance. And there's studies that show that there's no type of therapy that is necessarily the best. What seems to work is certain therapists.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. So, as a psychotherapist, you see a lot of couples in counseling, in therapy. What's the most common issue that comes up time and time again?
Well, there's really only two issues that come up. One is who's to blame,
That's a wide swath. Okay.
and their lack of understanding of each other. So I've never had a couple come into my office and say, Jonathan, we understand each other really well. That's why we want a divorce.
Yeah, right.
You know, so
Mhm.
couples really don't understand each other very well due to poor communication skills. And therefore, what they do is they blame, they complain, and they shame their partners. And that doesn't work. I've never blamed my wife, and then she said, "Oh my gosh, I now see what you're talking about. I will have to change. Thank you for showing me the errors of my ways." That's never happened.
I can believe it. I can well believe it.
And yet
Um,
we act like that's like someday that would happen, but it's
uh,
not going to.
yeah.
So how to communicate your needs and desires without blaming your partner is really the issue that I see all couples have.
Hmm.
And once I teach them some ways to do that, I only see clients 2 sessions or less. I never see clients more than 2 sessions.
Wow.
Can I say
Okay.
if I can't?
Here's what I've got to teach you. We're going to do it in 2 sessions, and that's it.
Yeah,
So you don't have a lot of problems with transference or
no,
other issues like that.
I don't.
Yeah.
I do have clients that want that, and I say I'm not the person. I'll send
Uh-huh.
you to somebody who does that.
Uh-huh.
I'm
Wow.
really more like a communication coach
I was
that
just
if
wondering. Yeah.
that I say if you use this, it will work, and if you don't, it won't. Your choice.
2 sessions. What have you got to lose?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I have about a 95% success rate in turning things around in those 2 sessions, if people do the methods.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, let's start to get into that. One of the things you talk about are the 5 things not to do when talking with your partner. I have a feeling we've already heard a couple of them, but go
Yeah.
ahead. What are the 5?
Well, the four of them start with the letter D. One is denigration,
Okay.
which is putting your partner down.
Yeah.
Another, or blaming them. Another is dismissal, where you kind of belittle their emotions, like, "Oh, it's not that big a deal," or "Why are you so upset?" People hate that. Denying a problem, that's certainly not helpful. Then there's distraction. That's a big problem nowadays. We have what I call WMDs, not weapons of mass destruction, but we have these, which are widgets of mass distraction.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah,
I'm with
yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, oh yeah, we're doing this interview, right? Right.
Yeah. Boy, we
So
both have them really close at hand too, don't we?
we do, we do. So that's a big problem nowadays because people
Yeah.
want depth and intimacy, but texting or email or even Facebook are very superficial ways to communicate. A thousand Facebook friends does not really equal one good friend who's there for you.
Right. I experience that. I'm on Facebook mostly just to communicate with family a bit and to to announce these episodes. But to me, Facebook seems like a lonely place.
Yeah, we have an epidemic of loneliness now. It's gone up 20% in the last 20 years. Obviously, we hear about this big suicide epidemic that we have. And it makes me sad because these things could be easily solved if people had the right information.
Hmm.
But our media does not put that information out normally. So luckily, there's podcasts like this for people who want some cutting edge ideas. Um, but yeah, I don't experience loneliness anymore. And I used to experience it a lot. So I think well, for example, on my website, morelovelessconflict.com, I have what's called the 12 questions of instant intimacy. And these are 12 questions you can ask your partner or a friend, and they always lead to an intimate conversation.
Okay, now 12 is a big number. Can you remember all 12 and share them with us?
No, I can remember a couple of them.
Okay,
Like,
or you're allowed to refer to your book if you want to.
yeah, in the
Yeah,
book I have 30. So,
oh my goodness. Okay, give us what you remember.
well, one of them is asking somebody, what brings you your deepest sense of joy?
Hmm.
That opens up a whole avenue of a good conversation. Or honestly, what was your very first impression of me? Or
Hmm.
here's one, we could try it right now. We've known each other now like 20 minutes.
Okay.
Um, what and the reason for this question is studies show that the number one correlation with couples saying that they're happy is the number of appreciations they give to each other.
Hmm.
So if you appreciate people, it strengthens the relationship. Now, it has to be sincere appreciations,
Right.
but although we've only known each other 20 minutes, I can say something I've noticed about you, David, that I appreciate is there's a certain conscientiousness you have in terms of wanting to put on a good show, in terms of the sound, the questions. You communicate everything that I needed to know, and it was very clear that now that's not the case with everybody.
Hmm.
Some people I
That's
feel
good
like
to
they have
hear.
an agenda. They're not clear communicators, but in your case, you seem to be very curious and also very authentic.
Let me give you one back then.
Okay.
So only fair here. I was impressed when you spoke about authenticity and about love. And those aren't topics that most people go to very quickly. And so I really had a sense that of comfort, that I could, and that you were authentic, and also in being very upfront about wanting to create something that was very simple because of limitations that you experienced in yourself, and so I think that was a kind of a personal thing to share.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I like this technique.
So, I mean, that method took under a minute, but it does strengthen our bond.
Hmm.
And to the extent that people know how to strengthen their bonds, they have more love and less conflict. And then there's also the methods for like overcoming conflict. And the blame method clearly doesn't work. So most people don't have an alternative to that. So that's what they end up doing.
Yeah, 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 that's true. How about, relationships with male friends is an important dimension of my own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always had just a few really, one, two, or three pretty close friends. And how is it for you? Has that been an important dimension for you? And do you find the same communication issues?
Well, I'd say most of my friends are actually women. I do have like 3 close male friends. I would say men tend to be not as effective at communication as women when it comes to intimacy.
Yeah, I experienced that in I, it's a fairly frequent thing that I've experienced is I'll be at some kind of an event, and there's this hanging around, standing around. It's not cocktail parties, but things like that, where it's sort of a social situation. And I will sidle up to a guy who looks interesting and try to strike up some conversation. I'll share a bunch about myself, but they don't seem to be curious about me. Uh, I give more than I get back.
Yeah.
I guess that's what it is. And I do think that the kind of communication that we're talking about might be more in the realm of what we would call feminine, a feminine mode, that women more easily go to that place where I guess we've come up and to be more guarded.
I tend to agree. I mean, for the last 200,000 years, we were mostly rewarded for killing buffalo and whatever to feed the
And
tribe.
other people, yeah.
So empathy and curiosity were not major survival skills, but the game changed maybe 50 years ago. And now women want men who can talk about their feelings. And if you can just establish good male friendships, that actually helps your survival and happiness. So what men can do, besides download the 12 questions of instant intimacy, is they can share stuff about themselves and then ask that person, that guy, would you be interested in knowing my answer to that? And then they have to ask that question. And in fact, you did that just did that with you, and you responded just beautifully, David. I shared something that I appreciate about you.
Yeah.
And you automatically then shared something that you appreciate about me. Now, had you not done that, I might have said, so David, is there anything you've noticed about me that you've appreciated?
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, these are little helpers to help establish the intimacy. If you look at the word intimacy, the instructions are in the word, into me see.
I've never heard it broken down that way. That's nice.
So when you reveal stuff about yourself, like right now, I'm thinking, hey, you haven't asked me any questions. I'm wondering why that's the case.
I've got a lot of questions
No,
here.
I'm saying that doesn't apply to you.
Yeah.
That applies to the person.
That was an example, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I like about you is you're very curious and you do ask questions.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So you also talk about a few key phrases that can transform everything.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of them in the book, but let me give you a couple. One thing that women should say to men, for the women folk listening, if you want, women will often complain about something a man's doing wrong and the guy does not respond well to that. So a phrase that women can say that really gets men's attention is something like, honey, I could really use your help with something. Now, men want to be like a hero. So when they hear that the person they love is in distress and needs some help, they are fully attentive. So that's an example of what I call power phrase. Now, what men can say that really is very attractive to women and gets their attention is something like this, saying, I want to really understand why you feel the way you do. Can you tell me more about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because women and men too, but even to a greater extent, women want to have their feelings understood and acknowledged. And when men instead just try to fix them, it really pisses them off.
That's true. Not only have I heard that said, not only have I read it, but I've been in that situation. Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's
those
just
are
a
examples
strong
of
instinct
phrases
for,
that
yeah.
that immediately have a very positive impact.
Hmm.
Or how about this? Um, just revealing, I don't really understand why you feel this way. I need you to help me to understand it. That's very, when women have heard a guy say that, they practically jump on them and then start kissing them,
Uh-huh.
because most men can't say that, yet most women would love a man to be able to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. One thing that I've noticed about arguments is that they seems like they can escalate just super fast. Um, they just, it starts off over something that's relatively insignificant, perhaps, and then it's just like a snowball. It just snowballs. What are your experience thoughts about that?
I agree. And I think that there's the reason is because we live in our like prefrontal cortex, but a large part of our brain is really a lizard brain, our whole limbic system and everything.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
we're animals as well as humans. So it's easy for us to go from our human part to our more animal. I have to destroy you or I'm going to die,
so if
which is
there's
what the,
any little bit of a perceived threat there is what will then trigger that
yeah, we
limbic
go into
brain.
fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah,
So a large part of the More Love, Less Conflict book is how to avoid that and how to circumvent that. One method which we already talked about is, if you see that you're starting to do that, just say the words red light, take some deep breaths for 2 minutes, and then you're back to being a human who can talk things out.
yeah, yeah. That really makes so much sense. Well, we've been talking about marital relationships or couple relationships, and communication, as you suggested earlier on, is pervades every aspect of our lives. So let's talk a bit about communication more generally. Um, and maybe I'm actually begging the question, why should we invest more time and energy in improving our communication skills?
Well, I can't think of, one of the reasons I got interested in communication is I couldn't think of any skill other than communication that by investing an hour, you could literally transform your life. Now, that hour has to be with learning really effective methods and ideas. But, if you invest an hour in tennis, that does not transform your life. If you invest an hour in learning, accounting, that doesn't change your life. But if you learn how to communicate in a way that leads to people liking you and trusting you, and leads to people wanting to be around you, that helps in your family and your intimate relationship. It also has a tremendous impact in work. So that's why an Oprah can go from the bottom of the scale in our society to the top of the world, basically because people feel that she cares and she communicates in a very specific way.
Mm-hmm.
If a person developed a really strong ability to do accounting, that's not going to take them from the bottom of the world to the top of the world. So that's why I got very interested in what the cutting edge methods were
Yeah.
and how quickly you could teach them to other people. Because mostly what I do nowadays, instead of psychotherapy, is I get paid a lot from Fortune 500 executives to speak to their corporations,
Sure.
because there's a bottom line result that comes from teams of people working together and communicating well that makes them a lot more money. So that's why I do those types of speaking engagements a lot.
Yeah. So when you're doing that, do you do it in a workshop format where you're just kind of delivering them rather than just lecturing? Do you get them involved in practice activities?
Ideally, that's the best way to do it,
Yeah.
where I give a method, then they try it and they go, wow, that really was very effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what was your experience of being with Oprah? Um, Whatever it is that she does well, she must have done with you.
Yeah, I'll give you an interesting Oprah story.
Okay.
Um, First time I was on, she said, I really loved your book, and um, I really liked your story about your dog. How's your dog doing? I felt
Yeah.
like she really cared, and she had read the
Yeah.
book. And I said, well, he's not doing very well. He's starting to have seizures. So I'm really worried about him. And she said, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. I love dogs a lot, and that must be really hard. I'll be sure to pray for him.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that struck me like, wow, this person really cares.
Yeah.
You know, 2 years later, I'm on her show again, and she comes up to me and she says, by the way, how's your dog doing?
That's yeah, that's great. That's such a gift.
Yeah. And I said, how'd you do that? And she said, well, it's interesting. I used about the time that I had my stillborn child and I was depressed. And I said, well, what do I have going for me? And she said, the only thing I have going for me is I really care about people. So she said, I made a commitment to show through my communication that I really care about people. And then she turned to the studio audience, and 500 people had just given her a 10-minute standing ovation for walking into the room. And she said, seems like it turned out pretty good, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Good story. Yeah. Um, so what are the main obstacles to people having better communication? I guess we mentioned cell phones and distraction. Anything else come to mind?
Yeah, two. Um, the number one problem is that people think that they're good at communicating. So if you're good at communicating, you don't ever have to learn about communication because you're already good at it.
Okay.
And so
Yeah. Yeah.
people know English, they can speak, but can they consistently get people to like them and trust them and get to a place of love and connection, even in stressful environments? If they can consistently do that, then congratulations, they're probably named Oprah.
Yeah.
But just because you're okay at communicating doesn't mean that you're a master. And there's a huge difference. I play tennis, but I don't think I'm, a great tennis player. Just because I can play, it doesn't mean that I'm great at it. And the same thing with
Right.
communication, that you have to realize that there's a big difference between somebody who's good and somebody who's a master. And a
Yeah.
master can consistently get people to change, get people to do what they want. Look at Tony Robbins, never graduated high school. Tony and I know each other a little bit. He charges $300,000 an hour.
Okay.
Why? Because he is maybe the most effective communicator in the world. So you want to be able to be flexible in your communication and have a bunch of tools available that can help you. So thinking that is a big obstacle. The other big obstacle is people think that blame works.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, I will then use what's called evidence. Well, even your sister said that you were wrong here. And I have 3 other friends who think that you're wrong here. And thinking that that's going to do anything, but it never does. It just makes you're like digging a hole deeper. So if you took away those 2 obstacles, people would say, oh, how do you do this better? And they would naturally learn it in an hour.
Hmm.
But if you already think then you'll never spend that hour.
I would think fear might be another obstacle, fear of exposing oneself, fear of being attacked, fear that you can't say it well enough, all kinds of insecurities that we have that might get in the way of communication.
I think that that is an obstacle, but I would see that the others are much bigger obstacles. That
Okay.
when people know the right method and they understand it, generally people like to reveal stuff about themselves. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
So, for example, here's a simple how. Um, Completing the sentence, if you really knew me, you would know blank. So, David, if you really knew me, you'd know that I obviously feel passionate about this stuff, but I sometimes worry that I come off as a salesman.
Hmm.
'Cause I hate
Yeah.
salesmen,
Yeah.
and
Right. Right.
and and so I'm always struggling with that issue. Am I conveying this without coming off too preachy?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you know something about me that you didn't know before, and if we went back and forth and completed that sentence, if you really knew me,
Right.
I do have to experience a little bit of fear in revealing stuff, but not that much.
Uh-huh. I'm trying to come up with one right now, but I I'm not coming up with anything very quickly here. So uh, maybe it'll come to me later
Uh-huh.
as we move along.
Well, you're
What about,
a pretty transparent person.
well, I certainly try to be. I mean, that's a lot of what this that's what works for me in life, actually. And that's what Shrink Wrap Radio is based on, is really trying to be as authentic as I can. And as a result, there's an audience. And also I'm a marketing research consultant. And so it always amazes me. And this isn't, I guess it says something about me as a communicator, but also something about the level of that it's possible to build more of a relationship with a wider array of people than most of us think, because we hear all the bad news about people on the news all the time. But in
Yeah.
market research, uh, just talking to people over the phone or exchanging emails even, somehow we get to a place where they'll spend thousands of dollars to hire me to do some market research for them, even though we've never met in person. To me, that's kind of remarkable. I love that.
Well, it's partly due to your authenticity and certain things that you naturally do.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't have any of these skills, so I can notice them. It used to piss me off when I'd meet somebody who naturally had these
Uh-huh.
skills, because I go, "Wow, where do you learn this stuff?" But some people who have it naturally, it's like, "Well, why is this hard?" Well, it's not that hard if it's natural to you. If it's not, luckily there's technologies,
Yeah.
simple tools that can help.
Well, there's something great about you, which is that you had the ability to stand back and be a little bit analytical and try to figure it out, and figure out, okay, how do I become part of the party? What, you know, that's, I think that's a fairly unique, distinctive skill.
Well, I will take that in because I believe you're right. For better or worse, that's my thing,
Yeah,
and that's being able to translate that into ways to help myself that then work to help others is why the books have done well.
sure. Yeah, yeah, clearly that there's the proof of the pudding right there, as they say. What about the power of nonverbal communication, touch, reading nonverbal cues? What do you think about that? And I wonder if you experienced that with Oprah.
Yeah. Well, first, to answer the first part of the question, I do talk about that in the More Love, Less Conflict book. I give certain methods that can end arguments, like just holding your partner and breathing together
Hmm.
will have a dramatic effect on how people feel about each other. Or even holding somebody's hand and showing that you care. These are things that aren't talked about, but because we are animals and touch is really
Right,
important,
right.
I do mention them. In America, we have two basic forms of touch. We have sex and nothing.
Yeah. That hit home.
And yet not everybody, it's not appropriate to have sex with everybody. And sometimes we don't have a sexual partner, or we crave other types of touch, non-sexual touch. And most of us aren't getting it. So one of the things like I do with my wife is I often hold her hands. I'll hold her hand, and that helps us to automatically feel closer together. Or you see people with their phones now, they're not giving any eye contact, and that interferes with connection.
Yeah,
So it's,
I see kids that are not getting eye contact from the parents, you know, at the park or someplace, and the parent is just totally absorbed in their iPhone, and the kids just, you know,
yeah,
getting
yeah,
nothing.
yeah. And you asked
Yeah.
about Oprah. Well, she does it all. She put her hand on my shoulder, which, is like, I really like you. And
Uh,
uh, she does a lot of nodding. Sometimes when you talk to her, you really feel like she's getting your feelings, and that's really partly a nonverbal thing. But another thing that they're doing um, was, uh, I guess, like sitting like me, meaning people like people. Says my internet was unstable there for a second. So says
yeah,
people like people who are like them. People like people who are like them. And the fact that I was sitting a certain way, she began sitting that way. And that made me feel more connected to her. So there's a lot of little things that happen in connection that if you piece them apart, you can actually start to be aware of a whole new way of connecting that might have been invisible to you before.
yeah, right. They talk about that in NLP. That's one of the things that was very distinctive about their approach. But it's hard for it not to feel a little bit manipulative somehow to me.
Yeah, well, I asked Oprah about that, and she said, um, there's two types of manipulation that leads to more connection, and manipulation that does not.
It's a
There is
good
no such
answer.
thing as non-manipulation.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good answer. And what about the gender differences? Most people have heard of John Gray's book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. What's been your experience in terms of, do you see sort of outstanding differences between male and female? I guess we talked about that a little bit earlier, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's a little more to say about it.
Well, I have a chapter in the book about that, and I think it is important to know the differences. Now, John's a friend of mine, and he said nice things about my book, so I don't want to say bad things about his, because that is actually a really great book he wrote, but he oversimplified it. In reality, everybody speaks a slightly different language, and you want to learn how to speak your partner's language. Now, in general, though, women tend to be much more emotionally oriented in their speaking, and men tend to be much more result oriented.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always the case. So you want to learn what works for your partner and be able to kind of use this Google Translate so that you can speak their language so that you can have maximal impact. And in the book, I talk about how to do that. One simple way is to see how your partner communicates to you and try to do that back, because that is probably the language they're most comfortable with.
Yeah.
For example, just another story. I used to have a partner before I was married that used to tell me all the time how much she loved me. And I didn't respond well to that.
Uh-huh.
And I used to always give her massages. And one day when I'm giving her a massage, she says, "Would you cut that out?" And I said, "What?" She said, "You're always grabbing me. You're always massaging me." And I said, "Yeah, that's true." She said, "Well, I don't like it." And we had a discussion about this, and we realized that when she was 12, she had a uncle who used to massage her, and one day he molested her.
Oh boy.
So she
Yeah.
took my massage as a sign of impending doom.
Wow.
Now, I had a stepfather who used to punish me by hitting me with a belt. But before he would do that, he would say, I'm doing this because I love you.
Yeah.
So I took the words, I love you, as meaning I'm about to beat the crap out of you.
Wow.
Now, we thought we were being loving. I thought giving her a massage was loving. She thought saying I love you was loving. It ends up, it was like triggering both of us.
Boy, I didn't, I can take that on for myself, the business about I'm doing this because I love you. I certainly was the recipient of various forms of corporal punishment,
Love.
Yeah, yeah. Not too much, but I was of some.
Right, right.
And yeah, I'll have to think about that. Yeah, that might have in fact led to certain blockages in me, actually. So if you really knew me, you would know about those blockages that it's been hard to say I love you. I'm learning that from my children. My children are so free that way that my adult children, they never make a phone call or, without saying I love you, or
Yeah.
end a phone call,
Yeah.
or send a text or an email. And in a way, I guess I'm really hungry for that, which is probably, and it's not just me though. I'm not the only person they say it to. But certainly I can learn from them, even at this ripe old age. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've learned to say I love you to my wife, even though, because I know the effect it has. To her, it means, this is crazy, but it means that I love her.
Yeah.
To me, the words I love you are like meaningless words that in some way are a little reminding of what my stepfather did to me. But because I know that the words I love you mean I love you to my wife, I say them.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking her language.
Yeah.
And she speaks my language, which is she gives me lots of massages.
Right.
So I feel very loved.
Yeah. 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 Part of my story is my grandmother would say, whenever we went to visit my grandmother, she'd say, come and tell grandmother how much you love her. And that's a double bind, right?
Yes.
Because it's like, to me, saying I love you, it feels like it should be spontaneous rather than compelled, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that really, unfortunately, put a big dent in that part of my psyche.
Yeah. So when couples can talk about this stuff, these little triggers, that really helps the relationship. So I have a chapter in the More Love, Less Conflict book, which is about how to avoid your own triggers and how to avoid your partner's triggers. So once you've learned to avoid your partner's triggers or your triggers, there's a lot more love in the relationship and a lot less conflict.
Great, great. Well, that might be a good place for us to wrap it up, unless there's something else you'd like to say that you haven't had a chance to get out there.
Well, I just want to make sure people download for free those 12 questions of instant intimacy. They're welcome to do that. And to invest a little bit of time, energy in their communication skills, either through my book or another book. There's a lot of good books out there. And see what happens. Normally people are flabbergasted at how different their relationship takes once they learn how to, like, for example, give empathy effectively.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait years. You see it in the first 5 minutes usually.
Where would they download those 12 points from?
At the morelovelessconflict.com website, there's a big thing that says, if you want the 12 questions of instant intimacy, click here.
Okay. Well, Jonathan Robinson, it's been great talking with you, and I'm going to keep your book around and kind of study it some. So, yeah.
I'm doing that too.
Okay, good. Okay. So thanks so much for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
My pleasure.